One of the reasons why we're able to get the ceasefire in 11 days, they didn't do what other people have done. I don't talk about what I tell people in private. I don't talk about what we negotiate in private.
The president added the U.S. was committed to Israel's security, but he noted there was really only one way to guarantee a lasting peace in the region.
We still need a two-state solution. It is the only answer. We renewed the security commitment as well as economic commitment to the people on the West Bank. I also indicated to the Israelis that I thought it was very important that they stop in Jerusalem this intercommunal fighting that is by extremes on both sides. Until the region says unequivocally they acknowledge the right of Israel to exist as an independent Jewish state, there will be no peace.
The art, I should say, of seeking common ground. This proposal exhibits a willingness to come down in size, giving on some areas that are important to the president, otherwise they wouldn't have been in the proposal, while also staying firm in areas that are most vital to rebuilding our infrastructure and industries of the future, making our workforce and our country more competitive with China.
Believe it or not, Republicans have already shot down the new plan. West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who's leading negotiations for Republicans, said the counterproposal is, quote, well above the range of what can pass Congress with bipartisan support, end quote. That's an interesting term. Remember, she is saying this as Republicans are in the minority in both chambers of Congress and are also out of the White House. Yesterday, aides to Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders met with the Senate parliamentarian to discuss passing Biden's infrastructure bill through the process of reconciliation, meaning it would only need 50 votes to pass instead of the traditional 60. Interesting idea. Except for Democratic Senator Joe Manchin opposes passing any infrastructure plan through reconciliation. Back with us, Renee Graham and Hayes Brown. Renee, earlier you called Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene the GOP children of the corn, so I get the impression you're willing to speak your mind today. And with that, I want to tell you what Joe Manchin said today about GOP opposition to the January 6th bill and how how that's going to go. He says, so disheartening. It makes you really concerned about our country. Asked about if that is an abuse of the filibuster, he says, quote, I'm still praying we've got 10 good, solid patriots within that conference. Renee, evaluate that for me. Joe Manchin thinks we've got 10 good, solid patriots within the GOP conference. I'm wondering whether I have a better chance of growing hair like Hayes Brown's than that happening.
You know, if Joe Manchin knows who they are, he should name them. You know, he's not going to find these 10 good patriots on the other side of the aisle to approve the commission. It's just not going to happen. Mitch McConnell has been abundantly clear. I don't know if there's been a single senator yet who has said that they're willing to support this. So I'm not even sure what Joe Manchin's talking about and how he's praying he can find them. He can pray all he wants. It's just not going to be there. You know, but the funny thing about this is like, hey, Joe, there's something you actually could do. You could vote to get rid of the filibuster, and then we won't have to think about this anymore. But he's still sort of playing this fantasy thing, and I think he likes the sense of having this power that he could somehow make Republicans do things that they absolutely positively are not going to do.
Hayes, the problem is that the January 6th Commission is quite possibly the lowest hanging fruit that the United States Senate will ever face unless they are involved in naming post offices. There's just nothing else that should have bipartisan support. So now you got infrastructure and you got the Families Act and things like that actually are policy oriented in which there might be policy differences. If you can't get this one done...
He's children of the corn, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene in Arizona, taking the big lie on the road because that lie is not going to spread itself. So that's the point here. It's not about overturning the election. It's not about changing anything. It's just about creating doubt in the process and undermining democracy.
And Hayes, you mentioned that it's about one more thing than creating doubt. It's creating profit. This is grift. In the case of Arizona and now what is being proposed in Georgia, there are private companies whose only claim to fame is that they parroted the big lie that might be benefiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good gig if you can get it, I guess. I mean, out in Arizona, the cyber ninjas, they're making about $150,000 off the state of Arizona, but they're also raising private funds to help their effort. No idea who this money is coming from, where it's going, and how it's going to be spent. So would not be surprised if a lot of it was just going into the pockets of cyber ninjas and other people who are helping spread the big lie. And it's really sad because on the one hand, there is the ideological side of things and wanting to win elections for the Republicans, even if they don't actually have the votes. But yeah, it is a lot about making profit. And it's hard to tell where the line is between those two things. That's one of the things that was the most challenging about the Trump administration, trying to figure out who actually believed all of this, who was lost in the sauce, and who was just trying to make a good, quick buck off of the lies and the insanity that Trump was spreading. And I think it's going to be harder and harder to parse out moving forward, especially as the Republican Party refuses to purge these elements, these grifters, from their ranks.
Doing real damage to our democracy.
You tweeted yesterday, time will tell whether the trust that was damaged in the aftermath of the election can ever be fully restored, but imposing accountability on those responsible can play a vital role in that process. I'm curious, what does that accountability look like? Is it in the courts? Is it what we see in Georgia with this grassroots movement where people were told either vote or lose your vote? The threat was given to them that this is what they are doing. They're trying to take your vote away. Is that the kind of thing that Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, all these places need?
Well, accountability has to come in a lot of different ways. It certainly has to come at the ballot box where we hold people accountable who have tried to make it harder for us to count in our democracy. But for me, as the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, the chief law enforcement legal officer of the Commonwealth, accountability comes by holding those accountable who have tried to undermine our courts. You know, we have rules in our court system, both at the state and the federal level. You're not allowed to waste the court's time. You're not allowed to lie to the court. You have a duty of candor to the court. Yet we have lawyers like Rudy Giuliani who have come to our courts in Pennsylvania and lied about what happened here and wasted the court's time. It's one of the reasons why I've appealed to the disciplinary board in New York State to try and hold Rudy Giuliani accountable. It's one of the reasons why I sought sanctions in a case out in Colorado where they lied about some ridiculous conspiracy between poll workers in Pennsylvania and Mark Zuckerberg and Dominion voting system. These lawyers need to be held accountable. Elected officials who push the big lie need to be held accountable. And then, Allie, we've got to get back to some truth-telling in this Commonwealth and in this country. Let's get back to an agreement on a basic set of facts so then we can have a spirited debate about the issues that are critically important for us. You know, tonight I was playing hoops with some kids in West Philadelphia, not too far from where you and I spoke just before the election. I was at the Christie Rec Center. They're worried about gun violence. They're worried about getting a quality education. They're worried about economic opportunities. Those are the issues we need our elected leaders focused on. We got to get back to that, get away from the big lie and start talking some truth in this country and addressing some of these big issues. I applaud the people in Harrisburg and Washington who are trying to do it, but we've got to make sure that all people are held accountable to the truth and to delivering for people in our communities.
I want both of you to stick around, please, if you will, because I want to speak to you again later in the hour. Joining me now is Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Attorney General, you and I were together in West Philadelphia just a little bit before the election. And while it is not the biggest news around the country, and folks don't know that it's happening, it's been happening in Pennsylvania for some time. Republicans have been trying to meddle with the rules about the election since before the election. They have been at the forefront in Pennsylvania of the big lie, and now it is continuing.
That's exactly right, Ali. Before a single vote was cast in Pennsylvania, we were sued 19 times by Donald Trump and his allies, and we beat back each and every one of them. And then after the votes were cast, they tried to make it harder for those votes to count, and they sued us 21 times, and we won there as well. We had a safe, smooth, and secure election that was run by Republican and Democratic neighbors and communities all across Pennsylvania. Local officials, community people in those neighborhoods ran the elections. It was smooth and it was secure.
Right now.
If Republicans cannot even agree on an investigation into a deadly insurrection, how much hope is there for compromise on any legitimate piece of legislation? So it might be no surprise that President Biden so far has pushed for more progressive policies than many expected, especially Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
I think that their outreach and collaboration with House progressives, while I wasn't there at the time, from what I'm hearing from my colleagues, is less contentious than it was with even the Obama administration. And so when it comes to that perspective, I think the administration has acknowledged that there are very strong parts of the progressive movement that frankly, like, saved the party's in November. And they recognize it.
In fact, so much so that I want to play some of what she said to you about her own feelings of wellness after January 6th. Let's listen together.
If I take a couple months now and just be really good, then I don't have to live with this thing festering and lingering with me like a roommate in my apartment for years.
So you're doing therapy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm doing therapy, but also I've just slowed down. I think the Trump administration had a lot of us, especially Latino communities, in a very reactive mode. And so I've been putting myself in a more proactive space.
Let's just talk about that. The Trump had a number of people in Latino communities in a very reactive mode. This is something you know a great deal about, you report on, and you talk to people. It's scary when the president targets a group of people. We've seen it now with Asian Americans in the last year. It does have real effect.
Oh my God, it's exhausting, Ali. It's completely exhausting. The full interview, and this was a place where Alexandria actually was able to talk about Latinos and Latinas, and it's not just for Latinos and Latinas, but considering that we are the second largest voting bloc in the United States, and she's not just a Latina politician, she's one of the most fascinating American politicians right now in the United States. The way she talked about the future, it was extraordinary. I mean, we have to understand that Latinos and Latinas are going to, she understands that what they do, how they act politically, is going to determine what the future of the United States looks like. But at the same time, it was like a roadmap, the way she was talking about what young Latinos, you know, I'm a bit older now, and so I don't have a lot of time to figure this out. But the interview was really for her giving a roadmap to Latinos and Latinas to understand that we have a lot of work to do to understand who we are in this country and our history, and taking the cue from Black Lives Matter, from the activists historically in this country who have said we have to study our own history. We have to affirm ourselves. And this is what Alexandria is talking about. But at the same time, I'm so happy that she talks about healing, that she talks about therapy, that she talks about going into the woods, doing green therapy, ancestral therapy, getting in touch with her indigeneity. These are all things that also are part of a roadmap for many Latinos and Latinas. And we
people act as though migration patterns haven't existed, period, and that they haven't existed in this way, and that this problem is brand new when it's just not.
Joining me now is my old friend and colleague, Maria Hinojosa. She's an anchor and executive producer of the public radio show Latino USA. She's also the author of Once I Was You. Maria, my good friend, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And I want to talk to you in a moment about immigration, a topic you and I talk about a lot. But there's a piece that I haven't played from that interview yet, and it's got to do with the personal trauma, something that conservatives mocked Representative Ocasio-Cortez for. She's not past it. I think it fascinates her that those 175 Republicans are past it, because they were coming for all of them.
Look, Ali, thank you for having me on. It's great to see you too. I was not expecting that the conversation about January 6th, because the interview happened a couple of weeks ago. I just didn't think that was where we were going to spend so much time. You know, you have a limited amount of time and a lot to cover. But as somebody who knows trauma, I developed PTSD when I was working at CNN covering 9/11. I didn't know what the heck it was. And it's a very strange thing. And I'm so glad that I was able to get over it after many, many years and a lot of therapy. And I could see this on Alexandria's face so clearly, that she needed to speak about this. And what's hard about it, Ali, is that it's there. You can see it on her face. Of course, when we are presenting, we all can put on makeup and look great. But when you're close up to somebody and the mask is off, literally the mask is off, there's the trauma. And what's extraordinary, Ali, is that just me talking about this on my Twitter and putting the interview up, all of the trolls come. And this is where it's like, wow, you know, she can't even have her feelings. And yet what I'm proud of her for, and you know, I'm always skeptical of politicians, so yes, but what I'm proud of her for is that she still remains authentic in that way.
Get that bill passed and move forward.
Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in a very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death.
Well, May 25th, will mark 1 year since George Floyd was murdered by a police officer. May 25th is on Tuesday, and key players in the negotiations about this bill are already signaling that police reform will not happen by Tuesday, but it could still happen. Congresswoman Karen Bass says, quote, "What's most important is that we get it right. I won't say we're apart on all of these issues. We just haven't finished." Senator Cory Booker says, "I'm not really looking at a schedule. I'm just trying to get this bill done right." The NAACP says they hoped it would happen by the 25th, but they want the right bill, not a rushed bill. And the National Fraternal Order of Police, who could potentially bring some Republicans along, says as long as we're still talking, there's still hope. But tonight, negotiations are happening amid another video showing the brutal reality of police violence against black people. These are still images from disturbing, newly released body camera footage from 2019 that shows Louisiana State police officers shocking, choking, and beating Ronald Green while he screams that he is sorry and he is scared. Ronald Green died afterward on the way to the hospital. His death is under investigation by state and federal authorities, and his family is suing for wrongful death. The Louisiana State Police acknowledged that the troopers did use force in the encounter, but say the use of force was justified. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Mondaire Jones of New York, a member of the Judiciary Committee. Congressman, it is good to see you again. I would love to talk to you sometime and not have a piece of bad news to discuss with you, but it just underscores the point that this bill, this Justice for George Floyd Policing Act, is low-hanging fruit. It's the minimum that we could actually achieve jointly, and it is still imperiled.
It really is the minimum that we can do, and I was proud to pass it with other House Democrats a few months ago. It would, having said that, be transformative. As you know, it would end qualified immunity for law enforcement. It would ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants of the kind that led to the murder of Breonna Taylor, and of course, it would create a national police registry for officers engaging in misconduct. And so we must pass this legislation. I'm fine with it taking a little bit longer than the anniversary of George Floyd's murder if we're going to get it right. And I have the utmost faith in the leadership and negotiating skills of Congresswoman Karen Bass.
Let's talk about the senators on the other side. There is this concern about qualified immunity, what you just talked about, the restriction on being able to sue police officers for potential wrongdoing in the course of their duties. It is something that Republicans have generally said they are not interested in touching. It is something that the police unions do not want them to touch. The other stuff is good and serious, but ultimately that is the one that matters to a lot of people, and that's the thing that rumor says is on the negotiating table.
It's unfortunate that it's on the negotiating table. As you may know, this is a doctrine that was created out of thin air by the Supreme Court of the United States. And it is a doctrine that effectively allows law enforcement agents to evade responsibility, even when it has been demonstrated that they have violated the constitutional rights of civilians. I know that there have been a variety of proposals floated with respect to qualified immunity, various versions of what a reforming qualified immunity would look like. And I'm awaiting to see what the final proposal will be. But I've got to tell you, I cannot imagine it passing in the House of Representatives without addressing.
What's the chance of the other things?
slim to none, I would say, is the chance of getting those other things done. If you cannot get this, you are just not going to be able to find 10 senators who are willing to leave the herd, as it were, and vote with the Democrats. Like Manchin and, to a lesser degree, Kyrsten Sinema, their argument is that the filibuster encourages bipartisan cooperation because you have to get, these 10 Republicans to help break a filibuster. But if you don't give them an incentive to break ranks, then if you are able to single them out, then they are you are unable to single them out, and they are just not able to break with their caucus. You're not going to get anything done. And I get why, on a personal political level, Manchin and Sinema would not want to abolish the filibuster, because then they're the deciding votes, and it's all on them. They can't blame the Republicans without the filibuster. They can't say, oh, well, they're the ones who are blocking this. It falls on them to not be votes 49 and 50 on whatever is under discussion. But I really don't see how Manchin can avoid it on this front with this investigation, with this commission. There's for democracy, and there's not. And if Manchin cannot find those 10 patriots that he hopes to find, then is he willing to be the reason why this commission doesn't move forward? I don't know if he is.
The Biden administration continues to show that it's willing to negotiate with Republicans on an infrastructure package. Nearly 2 months after President Biden unveiled his $2 trillion proposal, which Republicans balked at, the White House presented a counteroffer. In a memo issued today, the White House says the changes to the infrastructure package, quote, would cut the size of the proposal by about $550 billion, reducing it from around $2.25 trillion in additional investment to about $1.7 trillion. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki called the counterproposal, quote, the art of seeking common ground.
The act.
This was an all-out attempted coup. Mike Pence was taken out of the Senate chamber something like 60 seconds before these terrorists and insurrectionists got into the Senate chamber. There are things that happened that day that if 60 seconds went differently, if a different door was opened, if a chair wasn't barricaded in a certain way, we could have a completely different reaction.
Period.
And the people who ran the elections, by the way, are not subscribing to the big lie. They, in most cases, like in Arizona or in Georgia, in some cases, Republicans were saying, this didn't happen, the stuff that you're all accusing us of. But I want to just quote something from the Washington Post to you about how the courts can influence elections. It says in at least 93 bills in 26 states introduced this year that threaten judicial independence by limiting courts' power or injecting more politics into state judiciaries. According to the analysis, in at least 8 of these states, bills have specifically targeted election-related cases. In 21 states, broader court bills were introduced that would impact election cases, among others, by changing how judges are selected, which courts hear cases challenging the constitutionality of state elections, or how judicial decisions are enforced. So in addition to what Renee Graham just said, that you don't have to win anything, you just have to sow doubt, there is this other thing going on that in which we're dragging the courts into a place that is going to make it very difficult to adjudicate these things in the future.
That's exactly right, Ali. So let me break it down for you. After those 40-plus lawsuits that we beat back and the certification of the election here in Pennsylvania, then Republican lawmakers, seemingly at Donald Trump's urging, went to work to try and do 2 things. Number 1, to gerrymander our courts and try and take control over that, and also to pass really the exact same bills that are now law in Georgia and in Texas and are being pursued in other states, to try and make it harder for people to access the ballot box, particularly people in our black and brown communities, to make it harder for their voices to be heard, harder for them to count in our democracy. The good news is here in Pennsylvania, we have a Democratic governor who's going to veto those bills. But it's dangerous to think what could happen if they were in charge. You referenced one of the leading candidates for governor here in Pennsylvania. There's a few folks who have said they want to run for governor or senate here in Pennsylvania on the Republican side. None of them are willing to denounce Donald Trump. All of them seem to subscribe to the big lie, and all of them are doing great damage to our democracy. They are dangerous. These bills are dangerous. Efforts to gerrymander our courts are dangerous. We can't just simply dismiss this as some fringe characters or some, wackadoodles, as some people have referred to them as. These are dangerous people.
ask you about a voting rights bill. You and 3 other Democratic representatives have sent a letter to party leaders urging them to pass a more expansive voting rights bill. What are you looking for and why?
Our democracy is in crisis. The insurrection at the Capitol made that clear. We are seeing voter suppression being enacted in states like Georgia, Florida, Iowa, and Montana. And in a few days, it is predicted that Texas will follow suit. The project of the modern-day Republican Party is not to compete on the merits of its policy ideas, but rather to disenfranchise large numbers of the American electorate. And the only way to stop that from happening is to pass the For the People Act, also known as H.R. 1 or S1. Senator Manchin's alternate proposal simply is no substitute for what is required to save our democracy. The For the People Act would enfranchise an additional 50 million people, end partisan gerrymandering, undermine or rather root out the influence of big money in our politics, and also to roll back the voter suppression that we are seeing in various states. Senator Manchin's proposal would not do that. And so it was important that we wrote that letter to our colleagues to just put it in their minds and also, obviously, to make sure that Senator Manchin is paying attention to what will be required.
In her interview with Latino USA, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez says immigration reform is a top priority on which President Biden must take action.
The reason I take issue with this term surge and all of these things at the border, and just even if forget whatever you want to call it, the situation in general is unacceptable.
The issue of qualified immunity.
If it doesn't have qualified immunity in it, but it's still an advance over what we have now, would you support it?
I cannot imagine myself voting for something that does not address qualified immunity. It is what is going to deter officers in a meaningful way from engaging in the misconduct that is on the public conscience right now. And thank God this bill is popular with the American people. We should not be having to negotiate. We should be abolishing, really, the filibuster to get this through. And at a minimum, we should be reforming it so that we can pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act intact, as it was passed by House Democrats and as it is preferred by the American people, and as racial justice requires in the United States of America, required to save our democracy.
Congressman, good to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us. Congressman Mondaire Jones of New York. And that is tonight's last word. You can catch me tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern on my show, Velshi. Tomorrow, I'm joined by Democratic Delegate Stacey Plaskett of the United States Virgin Islands, Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, and the CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights, Nancy Northrup. Joe, don't want to miss that. That's tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern. The 11th hour with Brian Williams begins right now. Josh, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro here with me tonight. All right, coming up, new developments in the Matt Gaetz investigation. That's coming up next. This week, 35 House Republicans voted alongside every House Democrat to pass legislation that would establish a commission to investigate the January 9th attack on the United States Capitol. Those 35 votes were a significant step toward holding accountable those involved in the Capitol attack. But the vast majority of Republicans in Congress are terrified of that accountability. 175 Republicans are terrified, to be exact. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy did not support the legislation. Neither does Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, which means it only has a slim chance of passing in the Senate. In an interview released today with Latino USA, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said this about Republicans' continued denialism of the events that took place on January the 6th.
Well, good evening once again. Day 122 of the Biden administration, which ends this week having survived its first major foreign policy crisis. Tonight, the ceasefire that ended 11 days of back and forth fighting between Israel and Hamas militants has now been in effect for just over 24 hours. It appears to be holding. The challenge now, of course, to prevent skirmishes with police like the one that erupted today out in the open in Jerusalem and keep them from escalating and getting any larger. The president has credited quiet, intense diplomacy for bringing about the truce, and late today, as he hosted South Korea's leader at the White House, he suggested this would be indeed his strategy going forward.
Well, this is interesting, Renee, because Hayes talks about Kristen Sinema. I want to read you an article from Politico. It says, asked if the Biden administration should keep talking to Republicans about a bipartisan infrastructure deal, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand replied, absolutely not, because we might lose our coalition for human infrastructure. Instead, she's 100% in favor of pushing through a multi-trillion-dollar package using budget reconciliation. She says, I do not think the White House should relegate recovery to the judgment of Mitch McConnell because he will not function in good faith, says Gillibrand. So Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin are starting to be out there blowing in the wind with the rest of Democrats who are saying, we don't all think it's the world's best process. They didn't want budget reconciliation for everything, but they're beginning to understand that they're not going to get anything done if they don't use sharper tactics.
Well, I mean, the question becomes, how much is Biden willing to turn himself inside out and neuter his agenda in the process to achieve this mythical bipartisanship in which the Republicans have no interest? You know, his duty and the duty of Democrats is to pass legislation that helps the country. If the GOP wants to get on board with that, cool. If not, Biden shouldn't allow them to get in his way the same way he didn't when it came to passing the American Rescue Plan. And the funny thing about that, a plan that not a single Republican voted for, that they're now swanning around their districts claiming, oh my God, this is this great achievement and isn't this wonderful, when they know they didn't support it. So I think, you know, and look, McConnell has been very clear. He is 100% committed to stopping Biden's agenda. So the point is to ignore Mitch McConnell and do what you have to do to get this country on track.